Hello and welcome to Talk the Walk. I'm Azam Khan. The Hong Kong Law Society, a legal body with roughly 12,000 members of solicitors, was on a trip to Beijing this week. The Hong Kong Bar Association will also send a delegation to the Chinese Mainland in April, the first time since 2018. Both trips are of vital importance for clarifications, coordination, and judicial synergy between city and country, particularly as Hong Kong integrates more with the Greater Bay Area across the spectrum. Hong Kong lawyers are now able to practice across GBA cities, and the city will be crucial in providing its legal experience, expertise, and autonomy for the rest of the region. My guest today to discuss the city's legal standing is Grenville Cross, former Director of Public Prosecutions of Hong Kong. Mr. Cross, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So with the Bar Association making this trip, can you talk about the significance of it?
Well, it is clearly very important for the Bar Association to have good contacts with mainland legal bodies, and it was a great pity that they ceased in 2018 because confidence broke down between the two sides, and the mainland legal organs obviously felt they couldn't constructively engage with the Hong Kong Bar Association because of the way in which the association had become radicalised. And this was obviously very, very unfortunate. The Bar Association has a great deal to do in terms of upholding the legal system in Hong Kong, in terms of promoting the common law system, and in terms of ensuring that people do have confidence in our legal arrangements. And of course, that's also true of the Law Society. And so this is a very big step, I would have thought, towards ensuring that the one country, two systems operates to best advantage.
Right. There was a number of different series of frictions and tensions between Bar Association getting involved in different political things. And now this is a big step for a change, you think?
Well, it was most unfortunate. I mean, after 1997, the Bar Association was generally highly regarded by the local authorities and indeed by the mainland authorities. And that was at a time when it concentrated on its core duties of promoting the rule of law and upholding the criminal justice system. But as time went on, it became increasingly radicalised. It largely operated as a quasi-political party in relation to some issues, and this undermined people's confidence in it. I mean, the Bar Association has various objectives, and these include maintaining the honour and the independence of the bar and advancing the administration of justice. And in order to do that, it must have the confidence of the community and indeed of the society as a whole, as well as, of course, of the mainland authorities. And once it starts indulging in politicking of any form, that confidence is compromised and its clout diminishes. And this is why it became largely marginalised, and it was necessary for the Law Society itself to step into the void which had been created. But now, since the early part of last year, when a new bar chairman came in, the situation has been remedied. The Bar Association is now concentrating on its core functions. It's doing so in an independent and a balanced way, and people's trust is being restored in it. And in my view, that's very good for the rule of law.
Well, is there a common misconception about, you mentioned politicking, is there a common misconception perhaps in society about legal bodies being political and perhaps projecting certain political views and values? So how is that line drawn? How is that line straddled by legal bodies, or in this case with the Bar Association?
Well, I mean, any professional body, whether it's legal or otherwise, has to be conscious of its core responsibilities, which are basically to protect the interests of its members and to uphold the position of their respective organisations in society. In the case of the Bar, that involves concentrating on its key objectives, which are upholding the reputation of the Bar and promoting the administration of justice. Once it starts indulging in behaviour which is quasi-political in nature, openly opposing the government on various initiatives, siding with people who are critical of the mainland, adopting harsh attitudes towards the police when they find themselves in difficult situations, then it becomes very difficult for people to still have confidence in them and for them to be taken seriously anymore. So it's a matter of judgment.
They've not been to the Chinese mainland since 2018.
Well, that's right. It was highly unfortunate. And we did see instances in sort of 2020, 2021, of the bar coming out with knee-jerk reactions to particular situations. I remember, for example, when 53 people were arrested in relation to the election to the Legislative Council. They had held a primary which was considered to be unlawful because its purpose was to wreck the Legislative Council and to provoke a confrontation with Beijing. Now, as soon as those arrests were made, the incoming chairman of the bar announced that this was an attack on the democratic process. Of course, he hadn't seen any of the evidence on the basis of which the police had arrested the suspects, and indeed 31 of those suspects subsequently pleaded guilty.
And now the Law Society as well going over, and the head of the Law Society stressed that he pledged that he will seek clarifications on the implementation of the national security law. So can you just provide your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, that's a very good thing. If the Law Society or indeed the Bar Association have any concerns about the national security law and the way in which it's being implemented, then in the spirit of constructive cooperation, I'm sure that the mainland legal authorities will be very interested to know about them. But I think it's highly likely that they will say that if there are particular concerns, that these are matters which can be resolved by Hong Kong itself. For example, I saw that one of the things that had aroused some concern in the Law Society was the amount of time it was taking to bring suspects to justice. Well, that, of course, has nothing to do with the national security law itself or with Beijing. It's a matter of our internal criminal procedures. And it's entirely a matter for the courts themselves to expedite cases. And that's where the responsibility lies. And we saw that, of course, with the interpretation of the national security law as well, where Beijing basically said that you have the mechanisms in place to resolve this yourselves, and there's no need for us to get directly involved. But nonetheless, constructive engagements are useful, and I would imagine as well that they will also extend beyond the national security law to the proposed Article 23 legislation dealing with the matters of national security which have yet to be legislated for. And the Bar Association and the Law Society will be able to give their thoughts on these very important issues, which can only be for the good.
Given the infancy of the national security law, can you explain if the legal aspect and interpretation is it constantly evolving? Is it constantly a work in process that all sides and all parties are trying to figure out and develop?
Well, yes, it's very much a work in progress. Some parts of it were difficult to understand initially when the law was introduced because it didn't always fit neatly into the way in which laws had been legislated for in Hong Kong in the past. And there were some quite difficult issues that had to be resolved. And the courts, as time has gone on, have been able to do this. And they have provided satisfactory interpretations themselves of pieces of the national security law which were perhaps difficult to understand for some people. One classic example arose last December because the national security law provides for minimum sentences in some respects, and it was unclear whether mitigating factors could reduce a sentence below the minimum sentence for the offence. And this required quite a bit of in-depth research and argument, and eventually the Court of Appeal was able to resolve that for itself, and everyone now knows where they stand. And this actually was one of the points made by Mr. Victor Dawes, the new chairman of the bar, when he took over last year. He made the point that it would be for the courts to interpret this new law as it goes along, and they seem to be having no problem in doing so. Of course, some of the cases may go to the Court of Final Appeal, and they will resolve any particularly problematic areas. But so far, the courts have had no particular difficulties, as far as I can tell, in resolving the issues which have arisen under the national security law.
Despite some foreign rhetoric and noise towards Hong Kong and the judicial integrity of it, it is still perhaps a little bit underappreciated that Hong Kong still allows foreign judges to be appointed and to practice here. Are there other cities or other regions in the world that have that sort of jurisdictions to your understanding? And can you just clarify about the appointments of foreign judges?
Well, until the 1980s, it was very common for foreign judges and magistrates to be appointed in Hong Kong to all courts at all levels, including the Magistrates' Court. After 1997, it's basically been confined to judges of the Court of Final Appeal who are appointed to sit as non-permanent judges. And these are judges who come here for perhaps 3 to 6 weeks at a time and sit on particular cases. There's a panel of overseas judges which currently has, I think it's 11 members on it. and they can, depending on their areas of expertise, they can be invited to sit on our Court of Final Appeal. This is partly for historical reasons. It's partly because I think local people find it reassuring to know that overseas judges are sitting on the Court of Final Appeal. And it's also because the Court of Final Appeal itself finds the expertise which those highly experienced judges are able to bring to bear of great value to it. Remembering, of course, that those judges include former presidents of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, former Chief Justice of Canada, and former Chief Justices of Australia. So it has, in my view, worked very well. This certainly doesn't happen in most other major common law jurisdictions. It doesn't happen in the United Kingdom. It doesn't happen in Australia. It doesn't happen in Canada. And it's a reflection of our unique constitutional and historical position.
There's proposed legislation now to block overseas lawyers from taking part in cases relating to the national security law, unless it's, I believe, approved by the chief executive. Can you just share your thoughts on that?
Well, it's quite remarkable that Hong Kong allows overseas lawyers to appear in its courts at all. It was allowed before 1997 on an ad hoc basis, and that has continued after 1997. And normally, an overseas barrister will only be allowed to appear if a suitable local counsel is not available to handle the case, or a counsel who has the necessary expertise, and a special application has to be made in each and every case before the overseas barrister is allowed to appear. Now, particular problems arose in relation to the national security law because obviously the overseas lawyer, if he's going to defend in such a case, has to be given access to all the case papers, and which will often include state secrets and other confidential materials about police operations and matters of that sort. Now, whereas the judges, the prosecutors and the police officers have all undertaken to uphold the basic law and pledged allegiance to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, this obviously hasn't happened with lawyers who come from overseas jurisdictions. And even though Article 63 of the National Security Law makes it clear that lawyers who are entrusted with state secrets must protect their confidentiality, this is very difficult to enforce if they are living abroad and indeed practicing abroad.
Mr. Cross, I'm going to have to pause you right there while we take a quick break.
Right.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Grenville Cross. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Talk the Walk. I'm speaking with Grenville Cross, former Director of Public Prosecutions of Hong Kong. Mr. Cross, I read that former Hong Kong Governor Chris Patton has said that then Foreign Secretary Liz Truss had told some of the British judges to resign from court in Hong Kong. Is there truth to that?
Well, Chris Patton said that's what happened. You may remember the background to that on March the 30th last year, two of the British judges, two of the eight, resigned from the Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal over alleged concerns about the national security law. And they were two judges who were still serving in the United Kingdom, whereas the other six judges are all retired. So the other six judges, as retired, were free agents. And it was impossible to exert any sort of pressure on them. But unfortunately, it seems that pressure was put on the two serving judges to withdraw from the Court of Final Appeal. Liz Truss actually said it was untenable for British judges to consider to continue to sit on the Court of Final Appeal, which obviously made their situation very difficult. But nonetheless, the impression was given that they had voluntarily resigned from the Court of Final Appeal. But this was challenged almost immediately by Hong Kong Watch, which is an NGO that monitors Hong Kong affairs. And its chief executive actually said that they had been withdrawn from the Court of Final Appeal. And we didn't really know whether they'd been coerced into leaving or not, until that is last November the 6th, when the former governor, Chris Patton, was interviewed by a veteran journalist called Howard Davies in relation to his recent Hong Kong diaries. He attended the Bridport Literary Festival in the UK, and the question of the foreign judges came up. And Chris Patton suddenly revealed that they had been told to resign from the Court of Final Appeal, those two judges. And he said how much he disagreed with Truss for having done that. He said it was unacceptable. Patton, of course, is not only the former governor, he's also the former chairman of the governing Conservative Party with very close links to the government. And is also the current patron of Hong Kong Watch. So if anyone knows what's going on, then it's him. And so it's really shocking to hear what he had to say, and that Truss had in fact coerced those judges into resigning.
On the topic of Ms. Truss, it appears she's found also a new political revival platform, which is quite an anti-China platform, just to put it. I think it's quite accurate to say. And it's also raised some eyebrows, even within the British society. I think they find it sort of, I don't know, a little bit banal. So what are your thoughts on it, though?
Well, of course, there's a very strong anti-China element in the governing Conservative Party in the UK. And when Truss ran for leadership of the Conservative Party last July and August, she put at the forefront of her campaign her criticisms of China.
She doubled down on it.
And she kept criticising her rival, the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, for being soft on China. So she obviously thought there was a lot of votes to be won by flogging this particular horse. And clearly she was right. The hardliners in the Conservative Party obviously responded to that. But Truss herself is not a serious figure in British politics. She's utterly discredited. And it's a mark of how low politics has fallen in the United Kingdom that Truss was selected as Prime Minister against someone like Rishi Sunak, who is someone of real competence and great judgment. You must remember as well that when she was the Justice Secretary, she messed things up. And is particularly remembered in the legal community for having failed to defend the judiciary when they were being criticised for being enemies of the people over a judgment they made in relation to Brexit. Then when she became Foreign Secretary, her blunders are now the stuff of legend. And one remembers, for example, of her meeting Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Foreign Minister, in February last year, and telling him that long-established regions of Russia weren't in fact parts of Russia, which left her own aides absolutely flabbergasted.
That's right, I remember.
And then she even went on to national television and told the British public that if people wanted to go and fight in Ukraine, they could do so, apparently not realising that this is contrary to British law. And so after the succession of blunders, she was nonetheless selected as the Prime Minister, the leader of the Conservative Party, and of course then Prime Minister, and she lasted a bare 44 days. She completely crashed the economy and did huge damage to the British finances. And of course, it was regarded as a tragic mistake. She's basically a series of sound bites. Has brought great discredit on the various offices that she's held, and she's now obviously trying to revive her career on the back of her xenophobia. But I think she's now busted flush and everyone can see through her, so I don't think we need to take whatever she says too seriously.
I want to talk about China on the world stage. And with the geopolitical chaos that's going on in certain regions, China's on a role, you could say a diplomatic role, whether it's first the peace in the Middle East and its peace proposal for the Ukraine conflict. So could you talk about how China's given a voice to the global south, or would you say it has, in terms of it's okay to be neutral on certain topics of war, and which is where India stood as well, and that was a big problem during the G20 meeting in India. So could you just talk about China's role in that regard?
Well, China, of course, doesn't have a long history like the United States of engaging in conflicts around the world. And as a result, its credibility is far greater than that of the United States. It's able to be treated and seen by many places as being more of an honest broker than is the United States, which is invariably seen as having motives of its own to serve, whether it's in for example, Vietnam or Afghanistan or wherever it may be. Because it is taken seriously, it's able to have an impact on the development of events that is not possible in relation to the United States. And I think people increasingly are realizing where the United States is actually coming from. As you know, the United States has pumped huge amounts of weaponry into Ukraine. Its arms industry is doing exceptionally well out of the conflict.
They're doing the best in the world right now out of anything.
That's right. Over 800,000 jobs in America are dependent on the arms industry, so there's no real disincentive to disengage from the war, even though some people, particularly in the Republican Party, are now saying that this war can't be allowed to go on forever, and we should start to disengage from it. Of course, the the gun lobby, the weapons industry in the United States is immensely influential in politics because it pumps a lot of money into supporting various political candidates.
And there's a lot of strategic gains from the United States on doing this, cutting off Russia from Europe in every regard, isolating Russia economically, the arms industry making money, as you mentioned. But were there unforeseen, did it kick off unforeseen events that perhaps works against the United States, whether it's jeopardizing the hegemony of the US dollar or consolidating the Global South's views on global matters?
Well, obviously, in recent times, America has tried to cut back on some of its overseas commitments, these wars that never end. And I think the same thing will develop in the United States before too long. We're already seeing signs of it. At the moment, as I say, its arms industry is doing exceptionally well out of it. It's using the conflict to consolidate its control over its various allies and to recruit new allies into the NATO alliance, which it dominates, including Sweden and Finland. And it's also using the Ukraine itself to try to humble Russia without having to dirty its own hands, as it were. So it sees positive advantages in keeping the momentum of the war going. And it's only when the peacemakers make their voices heard, whether in the United States or in the Far East, that some progress will be made. And it was interesting indeed that although President Joe Biden immediately dismissed China's plan, it was given a warmer welcome by President Zelensky himself of Ukraine, who said he was happy to discuss it with China.
Speaking of the United States, I want to talk about a very recent development earlier this week that is in the pipelines right now in the United States, being drafted by senators, called the Restrict Act, drafted by the same senators from the hearing that you might have seen with the CEO of TikTok, which was quite entertaining, so to speak. And these are the same senators who showcased their understanding of the tech world that are drafting this broad brush sweep of restricting and penalizing Americans 20 years in jail if they engage with a number of websites or tech or what have you that could be linked to foreign adversaries. And obviously this has startled a lot of different groups, including the crypto world, because they rely on being able to deal with tech companies, innovation companies, and they don't know what it means. So that can go on, but can you talk about your thoughts on this? And perhaps there's some double standard as well on this with regards, this is all under the guise of national security, but far outstretching towards now we're entering tech industries and innovation and everything just to contain China.
Well, of course, the particular concern is the fact that Hong Kong itself is described in the legislation as being a foreign adversary. And we've done absolutely nothing to harm the United States, whereas they have spent their time trying to harm us. You've got to remember that in 2020, Donald Trump, when he withdrew the trading preferences which Hong Kong enjoyed with the United States, and when he ordered that in future Hong Kong labels could not appear on Hong Kong exports, when he imposed sanctions on our officials, he said at the time that he was hoping to destroy our financial system. He actually said that no one will want to do business in Hong Kong anymore. They'll only want to do business in places like New York and London. So his plan was then to destroy Hong Kong. And that, of course, didn't succeed. So the following year, or 2022, once Joe Biden had taken over, he himself introduced a business advisory in which he advised the countries of the companies in the United States that it was very dangerous to do business in Hong Kong. Fortunately, most of them ignored that warning and carried on as business as usual. So this latest measure, the business advisory, the Trump anti-Hong Kong measures, they're all part of a pattern designed to harm Hong Kong and, by harming Hong Kong, to undermine China.
Mr. Cross, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you very much.
That's all for now, and I'll see you same time next week. Thank you.